March 28, 1942, 1:34 hours. Approaches to St. Nazaire, France. The tide is rising. Black Atlantic water heaves against steel plating as searchlights claw across the estuary. On the bridge of the aging destroyer HMS Campbeltown, Commander Robert Ryder grips the voice pipe and stares dead ahead. The lure smells of mud and cordite. A green flare arcs into the night. German signal lamps blink from the riverbank. Identification challenge. The destroyer answers with captured recognition codes. Her silhouette altered to resemble a German Mal-class torpedo boat. For a moment, the deception holds. Engines throb at 19 knots. Behind her, a flotilla of motor launches claws through the wake. Their decks packed with commandos from No. 2 Commando. Faces blackened, Thompson submachine guns cradle tight. Then the shore batteries open fire. Tracers slash the dark. A 20mm flak veerling chatters from the docks. The first shells punch into Campbeltown's thin skin, showering the forecastle with sparks. A rating goes down without a sound. Ryder does not look back. He leans toward the helmsman, steady as she goes. You can feel the vibration through the deck plates. Every rivet trembles. The bow lifts and falls with the tide, pointed straight at the Normandy dock caisson gate, the only dry dock on the Atlantic seaboard large enough to service the battleship Tirpitz. Deny that dock, and the pride of the Kriegsmarine loses her sanctuary. Fail, and the Atlantic remains a hunting ground. A shell smashes through the bridge screen. Splinters whip across the chart table. Ryder's cap is torn from his head. He does not flinch. Below decks, hidden behind false bulkheads, for tons of Amitol sit wired to delayed action fuses. Lieutenant Nigel Tirpitz checks his watch in the gloom. The timers were set before departure from Falmouth. Hours ago now. There is no going back to adjust them. Another flare blooms overhead, turning the estuary silver. German voices shout from quay. A signalman screams into a telephone. The ruse is finished. Full ahead both. Campbeltown surges. The old destroyer was built in another war. Her hull never meant for this. But tonight she is a spear. Impact comes at 1:34. Steel meets steel with a scream that drowns the guns. The bow crumples and drives 20 feet into the caisson gate of the Normandy dock at St. Nazaire. Men are thrown off their feet. The mast shudders. Then everything stops. For a heartbeat, there is silence. Smoke drifts across shattered plating. The dock gates groan but hold, impaled by British steel. Ryder pulls himself upright, blood running down his collar. He gives the order. Commando parties. Go. They pour over the side into chaos, scaling ladders under fire, racing toward pumping stations and winding gear that control the dock's massive sluice system. Bren guns hammer from the destroyer's deck to cover them. Motor launches attempt to land reinforcements, but are cut apart by point-blank fire. The water around them burns with spilled fuel. Ryder remains aboard. His ship is finished. That was always the plan. German troops from the 333rd Artillery Battalion swarm the dockyard, boots pounding on concrete. An alarm bell rings without pause. Somewhere inland, a staff officer scrambles from his quarters, cursing the British audacity. On the quarterdeck, sailors begin abandoning ship. Some leap into the black water. Others fire until their magazines run dry. Flames lick along the superstructure. But beneath it all, behind steel and twisted beams, the hidden charge waits. Silent, patient, Ryder steps down from the bridge. His mission now is survival, extraction if possible. He does not know how many of his men are already dead. He does know one thing. The dock must die. German officers approach the stranded destroyer cautiously, rifles trained on her decks. They see wreckage. They see a failed assault. They do not see the clock ticking inside the hull. Not yet. And as the first gray light begins to creep along the lawyer, the illusion of German victory settles over Street Nazaire. 2:10 hours. Normandy dock, St. Nazaire. Smoke hangs low over the basin, thick and oily, drifting across the floodlit silhouette of HMS Campbeltown embedded in the caisson gate. German searchlights remain fixed on her broken hull, as if expecting the wreck to move again. It does not. The destroyer sits crippled, bow crushed deep into the steel structure, decks torn open, gun silent. Oberstleutnant Hermann Kellerman steps onto the quay, boots crunching over shattered glass. He studies the scene through field binoculars. British motor launches burn along the river. Some half-submerged, their ammunition cooking off in sharp cracks. Bodies drift in the tide. To Kellerman, the verdict appears obvious. The attack has failed. Wehrmacht engineers approach the destroyer cautiously, rifles slung over shoulders. A boarding party clambers across twisted plating. They expect resistance. Instead, they find blood, abandoned kit, and the acrid smell of cordite. A wounded rating is dragged from beneath a collapsed ladder well. He says nothing. Inside the hull, compartments are flooded and dark. The Germans sweep with torches, stepping over fallen sailors. They examine the bridge, the engine room access, the damaged forward mess. Nothing about the scene suggests sophistication. It looks like desperation. A suicide run by a battered ship that never stood a chance. Along the dockyard perimeter, commandos fight in isolated pockets. At the pumping station, Sergeant Thomas Dern continues firing a Lewis gun from a shattered motor launch, even as German troops rake the vessel with machine gun bursts from the quay. His position is hopeless, but he does not yield. The firefight echoes against warehouse walls, sharp and relentless. By 3 o'clock, organized resistance begins to fade. Ammunition runs low. Survivors are rounded up at bayonet point. German medics move among their own casualties first, then reluctantly toward the British wounded. Kellerman confers with naval dock officials near the base of the caisson. The structure is dented but intact. The dock basin behind it remains dry. Pumps are operational. Damage assessments begin immediately. Engineers run calculations, estimating how long it will take to clear the destroyer's wreckage from the gate. Days, perhaps weeks. In their view, the dock itself will survive. Word spreads through Street Nazaire before dawn. Civilians peer from shuttered windows at the smoke rising over the harbor. A rumor takes shape. The British attempted something reckless and paid for it dearly. At 4:30, officers from the Kriegsmarine inspect the stranded vessel more closely. One lieutenant remarks on the ship's age, her American lines betraying her origin as a former USS Buchanan transferred under Lend-Lease. They laugh at the audacity of sending such a relic against fortified defenses. On deck, German sailors gather souvenirs. A cap badge, a revolver, a signal lamp smashed by shrapnel. They pose for photographs beside the embedded bow, boots planted triumphantly against British steel. The rising sun reveals the full tableau. Burned-out launches list in the shallows. Smoke curls from shattered warehouses. The tricolor flag still flies above the dock complex. At 6 o'clock, prisoners are assembled under guard. Commander Robert Ryder stands among them, uniform torn, face streaked with grime. He surveys the dockyard with quiet intensity. His gaze lingers on Campbellton's forecastle, barely visible above the caisson edge. He knows what lies beneath those decks. He knows the fuses were designed to outlast interrogation, confusion, even celebration. A German captain approaches Ryder, demanding information. Ryder gives only name, rank, number, nothing more. By mid-morning, optimism grows among the defenders. The attack is declared repulsed. Reports are drafted for Berlin, emphasizing heavy British losses and minimal structural damage. The propaganda value is obvious. A daring enemy thrust smashed before it could succeed. Dock workers begin clearing debris from the quay. A crane swings into position. Cables prepared to secure the wreck for eventual removal. Engineers debate whether to tow the destroyer free on the next high tide. No one orders an immediate demolition. No one suspects demolition is unnecessary. At 9:30, a group of German officers boards Campbellton again, this time less cautiously. They inspect her armament, comment on the removal of certain fittings, speculate about scuttling charges that never detonated. One man kicks at a bulkhead, amused by British futility. Below his boots, hidden deep within the bow section, now fuse the caisson gate. The delayed action fuses continue their slow chemical burn. Acid eats through retaining wires. Springs strain in darkness. The dockyard settles into routine. Guards are posted, but vigilance softens. Some soldiers light cigarettes atop the stranded destroyer, their laughter carrying over the basin. Ryder watches from the prisoner group as more Germans climb aboard his ship. He says nothing. The tide turns again. The lawyer shifts, currents pressing gently against twisted steel. And somewhere inside the wreck, the final barrier in the firing mechanism begins to give way. 10-12 hours. A pale sun hangs over the lower estuary. The dockyard feels almost ordinary now. Smoke thins. Fire crews coil hoses. German sentries lean against sandbag positions. Helmets pushed back. Rifles slung casually. The violence of the night is already being folded into paperwork. On the embedded bow of HMS Campbeltown, a cluster of Kriegsmarine officers stand where British sailors had fought hours earlier. One of them, Captain Lieutenant Carl Conrad, crouches to examine the forward 4-inch gun mount. He taps the breech with a gloved hand. Old, he mutters. Obsolete. Below his boots, 2 decks down and sealed behind reinforced bulkheads disguised as fuel tanks, the Amatal charges remain invisible. The delayed action fuses, adapted from British depth charge pistols, have been ticking forward through chemical erosion since before midnight. There is no audible mechanism, no clicking clock, only corrosion eating away at thin retaining wires that hold compressed springs under tension. In a holding area near the dock offices, Commander Robert Ryder stands with surviving officers of No. 2 Commando. His wrists are bound, but his posture is straight. He studies the pattern of German movement across the quay. More men are boarding Campbeltown now. Engineers, curiosity seekers, a photographer adjusting a tripod. You can see it in his eyes. He is counting. At 10:20, a German naval engineering team descends into forward compartments of the destroyer. They carry flashlights and notebooks. The lower decks are cramped and twisted from the impact. Water sloshes at ankle height. One engineer remarks on the structural deformation of the bow. Another notes that the ship will need to be cut apart in sections to free the caisson gate. None of them detect the false plating that conceals the charges. The explosives were packed inside the bow and encased in concrete to mask their presence from sound detection. To the untrained eye, the compartments appear gutted and flooded. Outside, dock workers continue repairs to adjacent structures. A supply truck rumbles past carrying wounded soldiers toward a field dressing station. A crane operator positions heavy cables around the destroyer's superstructure, testing tension, preparing for the next tide. At 10:32, a German petty officer climbs onto forecastle and lights a cigarette. He gestures toward the river, recounting the chaos of the British approach. His comrades laugh, reenacting tracer fire with exaggerated hand motions. The mood shifts from vigilance to spectacle. In the prisoner's enclosure, a British commando named Bill Savage leans closer to Ryder. "Sir," he whispers, barely moving his lips. "How long?" Ryder does not answer. He simply glances at his watch, though it was shattered during the impact. The calculation lives in his head. Departure from Falmouth, speed over the channel, the run up the Loire, the delay selected to allow capture, inspection, complacency. At 10:35, Captain Lieutenant Conrad orders additional men aboard to assess the anchor chain assembly. Nearly 40 Germans now stand on or inside the embedded bow. Some peer over the edge into the dry dock basin. Others explore passageways with casual curiosity. The Loire breeze carries the smell of oil and river mud across the quay. A church bell rings faintly in the town beyond the shipyards. 10:36. Deep within the bow, the last thin wire holding back a compressed firing pin gives way. A spring snaps forward. The striker slams into a detonator cap. For a fraction of a second, nothing visible changes. Then the bow of Campbeltown ceases to exist. The explosion detonates with a force that shatters windows across Street Nazaire. For tons of Amatal erupt in a confined steel cavity, magnifying the blast. The embedded section of the destroyer vaporizes, transferring its energy directly into the caisson gate of the Normandy dock. A column of water, steel, and human bodies rocket skyward. The dock gate disintegrates. The concrete walls fracture. Shock waves ripple through the basin, ripping loose cranes and tearing apart scaffolding. German soldiers who have been standing casually on deck are flung hundreds of feet. Those below decks are erased. On the quay, men are knocked flat by the concussion. Eardrums burst. Dust engulfs everything. The dry dock, once sealed and empty, is suddenly open to the lawyer. Water begins to surge inward, unstoppable, flooding the basin with violent speed. Machinery tumbles. Pumps are overwhelmed. Ryder feels the blast hit, like a physical blow even from the prisoner compound. He staggers but does not fall. Around him, German guards lie stunned, weapons scattered. Across the dockyard, sirens wail again, but this time the sound carries panic. The Normandy dock is finished, and as the basin fills with river water and twisted wreckage, a new realization spreads through Street Nazaire. The British destroyer was never meant to leave. 10:40 hours. St. Nazaire is still shaking. The plume of water and steel has not yet settled when the scale of destruction becomes undeniable. The Normandy dock's massive caisson gate is gone, obliterated by the internal blast of HMS Campbeltown. A jagged cavity gapes where reinforced steel once sealed the basin. River water pours through the breach with unstoppable force, churning white as it floods a dry dock that had been the pride of the Atlantic coast. German officers scramble through dust and smoke, uniforms torn, faces streaked with blood. Orders are shouted but dissolve into confusion. Telephone lines hang severed. Runners sprint between command posts carrying fragmented reports. No one speaks of victory now. Bodies lie scattered across the quay, many thrown clear by the concussion. Others are buried beneath shattered concrete and twisted crane arms. The engineering party that had descended into the bow section is simply gone. 40 men, erased in a fraction of a second. Captain Lieutenant Karl Conrad staggers to his feet near a collapsed warehouse wall. His ears ring so violently he cannot hear his own breathing. He stares toward the basin, as if refusing to accept what he sees. The dock is filling, fast. The pumps that once kept it dry are now submerged or destroyed. Within minutes, the enormity spreads beyond the yard. Windows across Street Nazaire have shattered inward. Civilians emerge into streets coated with fine gray dust. They look toward the harbor, where a thick column of smoke climbs into the morning sky. In the prisoner enclosure, Commander Robert Ryder stands motionless. German guards recover first, weapons raise again, fury replacing shock. Several British prisoners are struck with rifle butts in retaliation. Ryder does not react. His eyes remain fixed on the collapsing dock gate. He knows what that breach means. By 11 o'clock, the basin is a violent whirlpool of debris. The once dry floor disappears beneath swirling brown water. Sections of machinery, rails, and shattered scaffolding tumble together. Engineers attempt to estimate structural integrity, but the calculations are meaningless. The caisson was the dock's heart. Without it, the chamber cannot be drained. A senior Kriegsmarine staff officer arrives from headquarters, coat flapping as he surveys the wreckage. He demands immediate status updates. Subordinates struggle to answer. Casualty figures are unclear. Structural damage appears catastrophic. One phrase begins circulating in hushed tones. Tirpitz. The battleship Tirpitz had relied on this dock as her only Atlantic refuge. If damaged by British bombers or submarines, St. Nazaire was the sole facility capable of repairing her hull. Without it, she would be forced back to Germany or risk remaining at sea, vulnerable. The realization settles slowly but heavily. This was never a reckless assault. It was calculated denial. At 11:30, Berlin is informed. Initial reports had celebrated repulse of a British raid. Now revised dispatches describe catastrophic structural loss. The tone shifts from triumph to controlled alarm. High Command requests immediate assessment of repair feasibility. Engineers walk the perimeter of the shattered dock, boots slipping on wet concrete. They measure fractures in the retaining walls. They calculate the tidal force pouring through the breach. Each estimate grows darker. Reconstruction will not be quick. It may take years. German soldiers who had posed for photographs hours earlier now assist in carrying the dead. Stretchers line the quay. Identification discs are collected in silence. The atmosphere has changed completely. No laughter remains. From his place among the prisoners, Ryder finally exhales. Not relief. Confirmation. The charge had detonated at the precise moment when complacency peaked. The delay ensured maximum German presence aboard the vessel. The explosion did not merely destroy steel. It shattered confidence. By midday, rumors ripple through coastal command. How could such a deception succeed? How did British engineers conceal 4 tons of amytal inside an obsolete destroyer without detection? Why were inspections so casual? Questions multiply, each more uncomfortable than the last. The flooded basin reflects broken sky and twisted metal. It will not be drained again for the duration of the war. And somewhere in the corridors of German naval strategy, a map of the Atlantic is quietly reconsidered. 12:45 hours. The water in the ruined basin has risen to its full, merciless level. The Normandy dock is no longer a dock. It is a flooded grave. Twisted rails vanish beneath brown currents. Crane booms jet at broken angles like snap bones. Oil spreads across the surface in slow, iridescent sheets. The Atlantic has reclaimed what German engineers once believed untouchable. Ambulance trucks grind across the quay, collecting wounded in grim silence. Medics kneel beside shattered masonry, working quickly, sleeves soaked in blood. The dead are lined in rows near a warehouse wall, boots aligned out of habit more than ceremony. Identification tags are checked twice. Names are written in notebooks already damp with river spray. Among the prisoners, the British are separated by rank. Commander Robert Ryder is marched toward an administrative building whose windows were blown inward by the blast. His boots leave wet prints on concrete still trembling from aftershocks. Guards no longer shout. They speak in clipped, controlled tones. The shock has hardened into anger. Inside the dockyard offices, German naval staff pore over charts of the Atlantic coast. A red pencil circles street Nazaire repeatedly, as if pressure might undo the damage. The loss is not just structural. It is strategic. The battleship Tirpitz now has no Atlantic sanctuary large enough to shelter her hull. If crippled in action, she cannot be repaired here. That single fact shifts calculations across the Kriegsmarine. In a holding room, Ryder is questioned again. The interrogator demands to know who authorized the mission, what explosives were used, how the timers were set. Ryder offers only the required response. Name, rank, number. The German officer studies him for signs of satisfaction. He finds none. Outside, divers prepare to enter the flooded basin. They descend cautiously, tethered by lifelines, searching for structural fragments that might be salvaged. Visibility is almost zero. Jagged steel and shattered concrete create a lethal maze beneath the surface. Within minutes, one diver surfaces, shaking his head. The caisson gate is not merely damaged. It is gone. By mid-afternoon, a somber report is drafted for Berlin. Casualty estimates rise with every head count. More than 200 German personnel are believed dead or missing, many of them killed in the blast that followed what had seemed concluded battle. The psychological weight is heavier than the numbers. Confidence was the final casualty. In the streets of St. Nazaire, civilians whisper about the explosion. Some saw German officers laughing atop the stranded destroyer earlier that morning. The contrast lingers in memory. Triumph had lasted only hours. At the river's edge, remnants of the British flotilla drift ashore. Burned timbers knock gently against stone embankments. A Royal Navy ensign, torn and blackened, is retrieved by a dock worker who hesitates before handing it over to a guard. Even symbols carry a charge now. Ryder and his surviving men are marched toward transport trucks bound for prisoner-of-war camps. As they pass the flooded dock, he allows himself one final glance. The basin reflects a broken sky. The tide moves freely through what was once sealed steel. He knows the cost. Of the 611 men who sailed, many will never return. Motor launches were shredded by point-blank fire. Commandos fell at pumping stations and lock mechanisms. The mission demanded sacrifice measured in lives, not only tonnage, but the objective stands achieved. By 1700 hours, German engineers conclude their preliminary assessment. Rebuilding the dock will require extensive reconstruction of the caisson system and reinforced walls. It cannot be completed quickly. The Atlantic War will proceed without this refuge. In Berlin, naval planners recalculate deployment patterns. The Tirpitz must remain in Norwegian waters, where fjords offer concealment but limited repair capability. Each sortie will carry increased risk. British intelligence will soon confirm what German command already fears. The sun begins to lower over the Loire, casting long shadows across the ruined dockyard. Work continues, but without urgency. The impossible has already happened, and as darkness approaches once more, the Atlantic campaign tilts, subtly but decisively, away from the harbor that believed itself invulnerable. March 29, 1942, 6:10 hours. London wakes under a low gray sky. Inside the Admiralty, cigarette smoke coils beneath ceiling lamps that have burned all night. Signals officers move briskly between rooms carrying decoded fragments from the French coast. Confirmation arrives in stages. Explosion. Dock destroyed. Heavy enemy casualties. The words are clinical, but the implication is immense. At a long table scarred by years of war planning, senior naval staff study the update in silence. A pencil taps against a chart of the Bay of Biscay. Someone circles Street Nazaire once. Firmly, the mission, codenamed Operation Chariot, has succeeded beyond its narrow tactical objective. Far to the north, in occupied Norway, the battleship Tirpitz lies anchored within a fjord, mountains rising like stone sentries around her. Her crew conducts routine maintenance, unaware that their strategic safety net has vanished. The Atlantic's only dry dock capable of accommodating her hull has been rendered unusable. If she is crippled at sea, there will be no quick refuge on the western coast of Europe. That single constraint reshapes naval calculus. British planners recognized it immediately. The Tirpitz, sister to Bismarck, had already forced convoys to scatter, compelled escorts to remain concentrated, and drawn carrier groups northward. She was a fleet in being, exerting pressure without firing a shot. Now, every sortie she makes carries amplified risk. Damage that might once have been repaired in France will require a dangerous return to the North Sea or a prolonged stay in exposed Norwegian waters. At the Admiralty briefing, an intelligence officer outlines the implications. Merchant shipping losses remain severe. U-boats continue to prowl mid-Atlantic routes. Yet the removal of St. Nazaire as a repair hub restricts German surface operations. It narrows options. It creates hesitation. In war, hesitation saves ships. Across the Channel, in a prisoner transport bound inland, Commander Robert Ryder sits upright despite exhaustion. His hands are bound, uniform stiff with dried salt and blood. Around him, surviving commandos sway with the motion of the truck. None speak of success. They speak quietly of those left behind in burning launches and on the quay. Names are repeated like anchors against grief. News of the explosion spreads through occupied France with distortion and rumor. Some say the British detonated a bomb hidden in the hull. Others claim sabotage by French workers. The truth, precise and engineered, is almost harder to believe. An obsolete destroyer driven deliberately into a fortified dock, packed with concealed explosives timed to detonate hours after capture. German Naval Command convenes emergency conferences. Engineers present bleak assessments. The Normandy dock cannot be restored quickly. Reconstruction may take years, resources scarce under Allied bombing pressure. The loss forces reconsideration of fleet deployment. The Atlantic coastline is long, but suitable deep-water facilities are few. In Norway, Tirpitz's captain receives a coded directive emphasizing caution. Avoid unnecessary exposure. Maintain defensive posture. The language is careful, but the meaning is clear. The margin for error has narrowed. Meanwhile, British propaganda units prepare control releases. The narrative must inspire without revealing technical specifics. Photographs of the shattered dock are not yet available, but intelligence sketches circulate among planners. They show a basin flooded beyond use, its gate obliterated. The human cost remains heavy. Of the 611 men who sailed from Falmouth, 169 were killed. Many more are prisoners. 5 Victoria Crosses will eventually be awarded for valor displayed under impossible fire. Yet in this moment, decorations are abstract. What matters is a strategic shift. Convoy planners adjust escort assignments with cautious optimism. Surface raiders will think twice before venturing far from Norwegian fjords. Every Atlantic crossing becomes fractionally safer. Not safe, but safer. In Berlin, Frustration hardens into resolve. Coastal defenses are reinforced. Inspections intensify. Suspicion deepens within ranks that once celebrated prematurely. And across the cold Atlantic expanse, merchant ships continue their slow passage, unaware that a flooded dock in France has subtly improved their odds of survival. April 3rd, 1942, 18:20 hours. A barbed wire perimeter outside Marlag UND Malag Nord, northern Germany. A freight train exhales steam into the evening air as doors slide open with metallic groans. British prisoners step down stiffly from cattle wagons, boots striking unfamiliar soil. Guards bark instructions, rifles angled across chests. The journey from the Loire has been long, silent, and heavy with memory. Commander Robert Ryder pauses at the threshold before descending. The camp smells of damp timber and coal smoke. Watchtowers loom against a fading sky, silhouettes cut sharp by floodlights not yet fully lit. Inside, the wire waits a different war. Names are recorded, ranks confirmed, personal effects cataloged. A German clerk pauses briefly at Ryder's entry, recognizing the name from dockyard reports. No expression changes. Procedure continues. Across Europe, the ripples of St. Nazaire continue to spread. Naval engineers in France begin preliminary designs for a temporary barrier across the ruined Normandy dock. Concrete, steel beams, improvised gates. None will restore full functionality. The Atlantic tide cannot be commanded so easily. In Norway, the battleship Tirpitz conducts gunnery drills beneath a ceiling of low clouds. Her crew moves with professional precision, unaware of how permanently their strategic map has shifted. Orders from Berlin emphasize preservation over aggression. Each voyage now carries political weight. Damage cannot be risked lightly. Within the prisoner camp, British officers establish quiet routines. Barracks are assigned. Straw mattresses distributed. The wounded receive basic treatment. Conversation circles back to the dock, to the moment the destroyers cease to exist. Some describe the blast as thunder, others as a physical wall of air that crushed lungs and erased sound. Ryder listens more than he speaks. Leadership here requires steadiness, not dramatics. He ensures that morale holds, that discipline remains intact. Capture does not erase duty. It transforms it. Weeks pass. Letters are drafted under censorship guidelines. Families in Britain receive careful notices confirming survival or loss. Official communiques describe Operation Chariot as a daring success. The destruction of the dock is framed not only as sabotage but as strategic foresight. The only Atlantic facility capable of servicing a capital ship like Tirpitz has been neutralized. German High Command absorbs the embarrassment with outward rigidity. Investigations probe why inspections aboard the embedded destroyer were so casual. Why engineers boarded without thorough demolition sweeps. Responsibility shifts quietly between departments. Meanwhile, Atlantic convoys continue to face U-boat wolf packs, storms, and Luftwaffe patrols. Yet the specter of a fully repaired Tirpitz operating freely from the French coast has been removed. Surface raids remain constrained to northern waters. British Home Fleet planners note the difference in deployment flexibility. Carriers and battleships are repositioned with marginally greater confidence. Inside the camp, Ryder learns of commendations through Red Cross channels months later. Decorations feel distant compared to the faces of those lost on the Loire. Sergeant Thomas Durrant's defiance aboard a burning motor launch becomes legend among prisoners. Stories circulate in whispers after lights out, sustaining pride in captivity. Winter approaches. Frost forms along the wire perimeter each dawn. Guards stamp their boots against the cold. Prisoners queue for thin soup and coarse bread. Time stretches, but the outcome at St. Nazaire does not fade. It remains a fixed point, proof that calculated audacity can fracture fortified certainty. In France, the flooded dock stands as a scar visible even from passing patrol boats. The basin reflects gray skies year after year, never again drained during the war. Its uselessness becomes part of strategic briefings, a quiet acknowledgement that ingenuity outmaneuvered mass and concrete. For Ryder and his men, the war narrows to routine and resilience. Yet beyond the barbed wire, Atlantic supply lines pulse with renewed possibility. Every convoy that reaches Britain carries fuel, food, and munitions that sustain resistance. The absence of a repair dock in St. Nazaire remains invisible but decisive, and as seasons turn behind prison fences, the echo of a delayed fuse continues shaping battles far beyond the Loire. London, 1943. A year has passed since the blast that tore open the Normandy dock. The war has widened, hardened, and consumed entire continents, yet the consequences of that single morning on the Loire continue to surface in quiet assessments and guarded briefings. Within the Admiralty, updated Atlantic charts reveal a subtle but measurable shift. Surface threats from the French coast have diminished. German capital ships remain largely confined in northern waters. The battleship Tirpitz still exists, still commands fear, but her operational latitude is constrained. Every sortie requires deliberation. Every potential engagement carries the shadow of limited repair options. Convoy HX and PQ routes, once plotted under constant dread of a breakout into the Atlantic, now incorporate revised risk models. Escort commanders speak candidly. The destruction of St. Nazaire's dry dock did not win the war at sea. It altered probabilities. In naval strategy, probabilities decide survival. Intelligence summaries circulated to senior ministers described the dock as permanently incapacitated for the duration of hostilities. German attempts at temporary barriers have failed to restore full functionality. The basin remains flooded, an engineering wound too deep to suture under bombardment pressure and material shortages. At Buckingham Palace, citations are prepared. 5 Victoria Crosses will be awarded for actions during Operation Chariot. The language is formal, restrained, almost clinical. It cannot capture the violence of that morning or the deliberate precision behind the plan. It records gallantry under fire, steadfastness amid annihilation. It does not record the sound of steel vaporizing or the moment complacency detonated. In a German naval headquarters far from the Atlantic coast, officers review cumulative losses. The absence of a Western repair facility continues to complicate long-range surface strategy. Requests for expanded Norwegian infrastructure face logistical constraints. Resources are diverted to U-boat production instead. The strategic emphasis tilts further beneath the waves. Within Marlag UND Malag Nord, Commander Robert Ryder receives confirmation of his own decoration months after the announcement. The notification arrives through official channels, folded neatly, censored but legible. He reads it once, then folds it back into his pocket. Recognition does not alter captivity. It does not restore the 169 men who did not return. Among prisoners, the story of the dock becomes a stabilizing narrative. New arrivals from North Africa and the Atlantic bring fragmented news. They confirm what strategic reports imply. Tirpitz remains cautious. Atlantic convoys continue to arrive. The war at sea, though brutal, has not collapsed Britain's lifeline. In St. Nazaire, the flooded basin has become an accepted scar. Workers pass it daily. Children who were not yet old enough to understand the explosion now ask why the dock is always filled with water. No clear answer satisfies. The absence itself is the explanation. By late 1943, Allied bombing intensifies across occupied France. Rail yards, submarine pens, fuel depots all face repeated attack. The ruined dock requires no further targeting. It has already been neutralized by design. Its continued uselessness is a silent testament to calculated sabotage executed under direct assault. Strategists later describe Operation Chariot as asymmetric warfare executed with conventional steel, an obsolete destroyer converted into a delayed explosive device, a frontal assault masking internal demolition, timing calibrated not for immediate impact, but for psychological and structural maximum effect. Back in London, naval historians begin drafting confidential analyses while the war still rages. They note that the raid demonstrated a principle often overshadowed by tonnage and fleet size. Infrastructure is vulnerability. Remove a repair node, and you constrict an entire operational theater. Winter again settles over Europe. Tirpitz remains in northern fjords, increasingly targeted by midget submarines and heavy bombers. Her presence continues to demand Allied attention, but her strategic freedom has narrowed since that March morning. The chain of cause and effect traces back to the Loire. Inside the camp, Ryder marks another year of captivity. Snow gathers along barbed wire, softening its outline but not its purpose. He does not speak often of the explosion. He carries it internally, as confirmation that deliberate audacity can fracture seemingly permanent structures. The flooded dock in St. Nazaire stands as evidence. Steel and concrete once projected invulnerability. A single, concealed timer proved otherwise.